They said the chapel smelled of roses, not the living kind, but crushed petals gone brown in a pewter bowl. The candles hissed. The air trembled with the pressure of a sealed thing. Somewhere inside the light there was a soft pop, then the slow gurgle of gases taking up their inheritance. A guard clutched his stomach and swallowed hard. Outside, dogs lifted their muzzles and scented the night. Later, when the story broke free of careful mouths, people added what they always add to endings like this: a dark floor, a split seam, and the tongues of strays lapping at the drippings of a king. Henry VIII was always a story told with smell. Pitch incense, sweat, wine on a beard, rushes strewn over stone to hide what human life refuses to hide. In the end, his story reeked of more than power. It reeked of the body in revolt. Yet once he smelled of horses and fresh linen and the clean iron tang of a tilt yard at dawn. The groom who saddled his favorite destrier swore that the young Henry could stroke a nervous stallion into stillness with 2 fingers. A clerk in the chapel remembered the king after hunting, dust on his boots, sitting at the virginals and coaxing a plaintive melody from the keys until the candles burned low. A page told how Henry would pause before entering a room to adjust a tapestry millimeters straighter. He liked things aligned. He liked the world to meet its mark. He was quick in everything, quick to laugh, quick to argue, quick to learn a new dance and master it. The courtiers felt it like weather. When he stepped out into the sunlight on tournament days, the crowd rose not out of duty but out of joy. He was the golden prince then, all promise and clean edges, a man who could carry the weight of a realm with a musician's wrist. England in the 1530s made a theater of strength. Jousting was not play. It was velocity and faith, stitched together by armor and oath. The winter sun over Greenwich showed every rivet. Banners snapped like whips. A chill wind lifted the pennons and laid a bright edge on the afternoon. Henry VIII, 44 and still broad in the shoulder, took the lists like a storm given legs. His enemies were careful. His friends were careful. Only a king could afford to be casual, and so he was casual with the terrifying grace of the practiced. The collision was a modern crash before modernity. 2 warhorses found a single line of disaster. There was a screech of shod hooves on frozen ground. Metal became a bell. The destrier stumbled. Weight became a weapon. The king went down and the horse came over him with the blind obedience of gravity. Silence roared. Then the crowd remembered how to breathe. Later they would measure the hours that passed without speech. 2 hours in which England shifted slightly on its axis. 2 hours in which a woman at Greenwich, Anne Boleyn, held her belly and tried not to think. 2 hours as physicians pressed their palms to iron and prayed they would not be blamed for what iron had done. When Henry woke, something in the room tilted. He demanded the tourney resume. The old courtesy did not return with his breath. The eyes were still blue, but the light inside had changed. Those who had known him as a prince watched the edges of his patience fray. Modern minds would call it a blow to the frontal lobe, the subtle ruin of impulse and restraint. The court called it the king's will and adjusted their lives accordingly. The head was not the only thing broken. Years before, he had torn flesh on his leg. It had knitted and been forgotten, one more scar under silk. The fall ripped it open. This time the wound did not learn its lesson. It stayed open like a mouth that would not close. It gaped and burned and seeped. The surgeons lanced it and drew out bowls of cloudy fluid each morning and each night. They packed it with linen and herbs. They sang the same small song to themselves that practitioners sing when they know relief is only pretend. Imagine the way pain rearranges a room. Silk sheets become nettles. The brush of a servant's hand is a hot blade. A king who once stood through long ceremonies now sits, then lies, then cannot find any surface that does not provoke a cry. An infection is never content with geography. It sends its messengers up the blood, tapping its code against the skull. Fevers glow. Nights lengthen, the air grows sweeter, then sickly, then simply heavy with what bodies release when they cannot heal. Before the fall, Henry waited years for a son. He waited through miscarriages and suspicions, but he waited. He had been married to Catherine of Aragon longer than some villages remembered their own names. He had executed fewer rivals than his father. There was calculus under his charm. It did not last. After Greenwich, patience peeled away. Anne Boleyn's star broke. Thomas Cromwell's string frayed and snapped. Handsome plans went to the block. The axe became a punctuation mark at the end of arguments that could not be lost. All the while, the wound tutored the court. Pages stood downwind by instinct. Courtiers carried pomanders in gilded cages. Musicians learned to play a little louder when the dressings were changed. The stink at the center of the realm seeped out through cracks in etiquette and colored everything a shade darker. As the pain deepened, the body answered in flesh. He enlarged. The armor that encased him in 1540 tells more truth than the poems. A belly plate bowed outward. The waist measured into the 40s, then beyond. New harness had to be made. Doorways widened. Chairs found their arms removable. A hoist, hidden behind tapestry and discretion, took the weight of a king who would still be seen to ride. It is easy from distance to call it gluttony. It is truer to call it the tyranny of a body at war with itself. And the crude comforts men find when nothing comforts. The mask fought back. Hans Holbein pinned Henry to a moment of impossible control. A stance like a gatehouse, legs braced, eyes fixed, hands planted. That image conquered. It still sits in the public mind like a coin face. Yet even in paint you can almost smell the roses and pitch, the musk of animal and spice, the clean air that never was in those rooms no matter how tightly the windows were thrown open. The perfumes came from far places, ambergris, rose attar, orris and civet. Apothecaries measured with a trembling care as if accuracy could sweeten reality. Vinegar steamed in. Bowls, fresh rushes went down by the cartload, sprigs of lavender crushed into their green. It was pageantry against chemistry. The court learned to say with steady voices that the king smelled of devotion and rare goods. The king learned to say that his bandages needed inspection, and then he held them to his own nose in a grim parody of control. Suspicion thickened like syrup. Poisoners were suddenly everywhere, at the hearth, in the apothecary's chest, in the whispering pages and the foreign ambassadors. The rot in the leg stood in for the rot in men's hearts. Warrants were drawn with a hand that signed as often from pain as from policy. Loyalists discovered that loyalty can end in straw beneath a barred window and a short walk at dawn. By 1542, the leg had learned new tricks. The discharge thickened to a wicked green, then browned. The smell took on a color of its own. The physicians' notebooks turned discreet. They spoke of grievous ulcers and resorted to euphemism when their ink began to tremble. The king's eyes grew puffy. The whites shaded toward yellow with a slow, implacable tide. He slept propped up. He argued with the air. Once, a French envoy watched him stop mid-sentence and snarl at an empty chair as if the chair had giggled. The envoy never forgot that chair. Servants lifted him with loops of canvas and whispered counts. 6 men to turn him, 2 more to keep him from sliding back. Bedsores bloomed where skin could not catch up with weight. His tongue swelled so that words came thick and wet. His breath turned meat-sweet. The skull staff that rumors later pinned to his fist, topped with a grinning bone from a dissolved monastery, became a private talisman in some tellings. Whether the stick ever grinned or not, Death sat close enough that no one laughed when he tapped the floor and listened to the hollow knock. The court built a signaling system as if the king were weather. Colored ribbons and careful nods, red for a storm, black for depths that did not reply to reason, white for the rare, fragile clarity that could be coaxed into an hour of business if everyone behaved like birds in a thicket. This is how men and women survived him. They moved softly. They handed their enemies to him when necessary. They measured their words like apothecaries measure powders, knowing the wrong grain could explode a day. Christmas of 1546 passed under a thin crust of ceremony laid over a furnace. January opened it. A seizure slid the right side of his face down from its hooks. His words broke apart. He tried to sign death for an old servant turned rival, the Duke of Norfolk, and managed only a blot. The blot was almost enough. The machine of terror would have turned even for that, had not time finally done what no man in England could do with safety. It caught the king by the throat. Thomas Cranmer came to the bed. Even now, Henry strained to dictate terms. He wanted God on forms he understood, a transaction, an oath, a pressure properly applied. Protestant ritual had stripped away last rites, so the archbishop bowed to a simpler sign. If the king died in Christ, let him squeeze a hand. The fingers that had once upon a summer flown over a keyboard with the lightness of birds closed once, then loosened. The candles burned on. The words that went out to the world were neat and comfortable. The king passed quietly. He was laid out with the dignity owed to him. Behind the words ran the harder version. Embalmers bent over a body that had been decomposing for years in slow motion. They opened it and found what years of infection and the medicines of their age leave behind. They salted and packed and wound, knowing lead was both weight and mercy. They sealed the lid and heard, almost at once, the small noises of a factory that did not stop just because the heart did. The procession should have taken one day. It took longer. Winter had softened the roads to grease. Horses strained. The coffin was so heavy it seemed to push back against the men who pushed it. They stopped overnight at a religious house already humbled by royal will. The chapel smelled old and cold. The coffin sat like a squat idol under black cloth. In the morning there was a story waiting on the stones. The lead had burped open. Fluid had pooled, wicked into sawdust, smeared into little brown arcs where dogs had lapped. The guards stood with cloths over their mouths. Someone hammered fresh light over the seam. Someone else retched. People later added tears and curses and a stray that would not be chased, because when a nation tries to remember how it survived a man like Henry, it reaches instinctively for parable. A king who ate monasteries stops for a night in a plundered chapel and feeds the dogs. It is terrible. It is neat. It stains the mind in a way statistics never will. Windsor received what remained. Trumpets and Latin and black drapery did their work. The weight went down into the earth. The slab closed over him. He left behind a country he had forced into a new shape with appetite and fear, a church unmoored from Rome and moored to a crown, a daughter who would be called bastard and then queen, a son who coughed like paper, and another daughter with a spine of steel and eyes that weighed nations. He also left the smell. Not in the hallways which scrubbed clean, but in the stories that clung to wood and mind. Stories of a leg that would not heal, of perfumes brave as soldiers and just as doomed, of laughter that turned quick and brittle after a winter fall. It is tempting to count his life in wives and be done. It is easy to list the heads and close the book with a satisfied snap. But underneath the pageantry and the punishments ran the real constant: pain. Pain that drilled through patience. Pain that shortened temper. Pain that pressed his mind against its limits until it broke out in rages and suspicions. The wound in his leg was the secret engine in the palace, pumping infection and dread, turning policy into reflex. You can trace its pulse in the treaties that faltered and the friendships that died on parchment. You can smell it in the letters foreign envoys sent home, pages ghosted by vinegar and anxiety. Remember him also before the rot took command. The boy with dust on his boots and a melody in his fingers. The young man whose grin lit rooms and whose hand once could gentled a horse into stillness. Remember that he tried at the end to speak when speech had failed, and so he shut his fingers around another man's hand to say a simple thing. Power leaves residue. Some of it glitters. Some of it sticks like smoke in the curtains and refuses to lift for years. Henry VIII left England with both. In the quiet after the coffin settled, the dogs slept in the courtyard again. The light held, the chapel cooled, the rushes were changed, the smell receded from the stones, but the story did not forget. It keeps the scent bottled, ready to open, and when it opens, the room fills with roses that never quite smell like roses. If this held you, if this way of walking the edge between the man and the legend kept your breath for a moment, tap like, subscribe, and click the bell so you do not miss what comes next. Tell us in the comments which dark corner we should open next, and we will bring a candle.